Hi there, my name is Kaylee, and in this video, we're going to learn the history of slavery in the United States. This lesson is really hard to talk about, but it's important to know the true history of the United States so that we can build a better future. So let's start with the definition of slavery. Slavery is when one person owns another person who is treated as a piece of property. The slave is required to do a job and work for the slave owner without pay. Slaves do not have a free choice to do something else, to move somewhere else, or stop working. While slavery is not legal today in the United States, many countries, civilizations, and cultures throughout the history of our world were built through the use of slaves. Today, we're going to learn about the history of slavery in the United States. Originally, slaves were from any part of the world and could be of any race or skin color. Some of the first slaves were Native Americans enslaved by European settlers who were then brought back to Europe. And in the Middle Ages in Europe, many rich white people enslaved poor white people. However, most of the slaves who were forced into slavery in the United States were brought here from Africa. Before the United States became a nation, slave traders went to Africa, captured people, forced them onto ships, and brought them to America. These ships were not pleasant. The slaves were put in chains and had to lay in bunks with very little space between them. There was no space to sit up, and it was extremely uncomfortable and dirty. The voyage was very long, sometimes up to 6 months, and they were not fed well, and the ships were full of disease. Many did not survive the journey. This trip was called the TransAtlantic slave trade. The first slave ship to arrive in the colonies was Dutch and headed for Mexico with captured Africans on board. But the Dutch ship had been attacked by English pirates, who redirected the ship to the English colonies in North America. The pirate ship holding captured Africans arrived in Jamestown, Virginia in the year 1619. Once on land, the slave traders would bring the Africans who had survived the trip across the ocean from Africa to an auction and sell them for money or goods to the white people living in the English colonies in America. The transatlantic slave trade, which brought Africans stolen from Africa to America to be sold as slaves, continued for 200 years. Let's take a quick look at a timeline so we can understand how long the transatlantic slave trade lasted. So the first ship carrying slaves arrived on the shores of the United States colonies in 1619. The English colonies fought a war against the Kingdom of Britain from 1775 to 1783. The United States became a nation in 1776 when the 13 colonies agreed to the Declaration of Independence. But the transatlantic slave trade continued until 1808, when the United States Congress decided it should be illegal to steal people from Africa and force them into slavery. But it was still nearly 60 years until slavery was considered illegal in the United States in 1865. The end of the transatlantic slave trade did not mean the end of legal slavery in the United States. In fact, slave auctions increased as slaveholders, often called masters, sold, traded, or gave slaves away. This selling and trading of slaves often tore families apart. Many times, infants born to enslaved women would be taken from their mothers and sold to other slaveholders. Let's talk about the daily lives of slaves. Most lived and worked on plantations, which were large farms for growing and selling crops. Some of the most common crops were tobacco and cotton. They didn't have heavy-duty farm equipment like we have today, so this was very hard physical labor that had to be done. every day from sunrise to sunset. Mostly strong men worked in the fields picking cotton, but often women and children were also forced to pick cotton in the fields. While some women worked the fields, others worked inside the plantation owner's home, cooking and serving meals for the family, cleaning, and caring for the white children of their master. Most slaves lived in very small houses on the property, separate from the plantation owner's home, called the slave quarters. The master would provide food once a week, which was usually not very healthy, and consisted of lard, cornmeal, flour, and molasses. On some plantations, slaves were allowed to have gardens in the slave quarters where they could grow their own vegetables to supplement their diets. Remember, slaves were not free people, and they did not have a choice to be a slave. To prevent slaves from running away or misbehaving, slaves were often beaten, whipped, or branded by their owners. The plantation owners heavily depended on them to keep their businesses going and to continue to make money. It's important to note that the masters do not pay their slaves for their work, so most slaveholders made a lot of money and lived luxurious lives. A series of laws called the slave codes were created. These laws described the punishments allowed for enslaved people that escaped from their master in the plantation. It was not legal for slaves to learn to read or write, gather in groups, or own a weapon. It was also illegal for a free person, white or black, to help hide a runaway slave. A slave patrol was created where white men would patrol the plantations, the wooded areas, and the public streets to enforce the slave code and arrest any slaves who broke the laws. While many white people depended on slavery to make lots of money and run their businesses, there were also white people who didn't agree with slavery. Some states made it illegal to own slaves and were called free states. The free states were all in the north. The southern states continued to allow slavery to profit from the tobacco and cotton industries. These were called the slave states. Eventually, the disagreements about slavery between the northern and southern states got so intense that the southern states seceded from the Union. That means they decided to leave the United States and become their own country. They called it the Confederacy. And this was done so that they could keep their slaves. This led to the Civil War. Eventually, the slave states surrendered in the Civil War and decided to remain in the United States. At the end of the Civil War, slavery was made illegal in the United States. The year was 1865. While slavery was illegal, there were still many slaveholders that did not willingly give up their slaves. So new versions of slavery were created, like sharecropping, where black people were allowed to continue living on their master's plantation and would work the land. When the harvest came, their sharecropper was allowed to keep a part of the crop to sell for money. And the master would take the rest of the harvest and not have to pay the sharecropper for their labor. To learn more about the United States after slavery was abolished, see our lesson on the Civil Rights Movement. Practice what you've learned about slavery in the United States by doing the online games and quizzes. Have fun, and remember to always be clever. Hey!